ancient this is. You can feel how, you can feel the culture and the history there, and unfortunately most of it is being either destroyed or stolen or just brought down to dust. And the first alphabet was found in Syria, so people living there are they have a very rooted connection to human history, and it means a lot to people who have ever been through Damascus at any point or lived there. In the 1920s, just after World War I, Syria declared independence. And it was the first time that Syria, as a country, was independent from the region around it. Throughout history, Syria was always a part of a bigger political governing body. Either the Islamic Caliphate that went on for 1,000 years, or before that, the bigger Syria area, which had within it Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, Iraq, parts of northern Saudi Arabia, and parts of southern Turkey. And that was the first time Syria was kind of defined on the map as its own country. After the independence was declared, soon the French came in and they colonized Syria for over 27 years after that. The first Syrian democratic elections were in 1943, and the first Syrian prime minister or president was elected, Qawati, and he stayed in office for a number of years until the French left the country due to several uprisings. Now, during the 50s, what happened was certain generals in the army became too powerful, and they became too greedy, and they decided that they were going to try and commit a few coups, and they overthrew Qawati, and then 4 coups after that. So for the next 15 years, Syria, the sad part is, after 1943, the first ever democratic election for the Syrian people, and it was the last. There has been no democratic elections ever since 1943. That was the last one. After that, it was just one coup after the other, each one being a bit more bloodier than the one before. 1963, the 5th coup happened, and it was led by a man called Hafiz al-Assad, so the current president's father. Now, his coup was the bloodiest of them all. The number of people that were killed on his way to office was huge, in the hundreds of people in office that he got rid of. And then what made it worse is when he finally reached power, he got rid of everyone who helped him on his way up. So basically, he just cleaned out the whole cabinet and brought in. This man belonged to minority in Syria. So Syria, because it's such an old country, you have over 50 different ethnicities, races, and religions in Syria. Over 50. The number of different types and groups of people. Some of them are very, very small groups, and they're very, very ancient groups. So like the names you wouldn't have heard of before, and you wouldn't find over maybe 300 to 400 people on earth who come from that ethnicity or believe or are part of that group, and they live in certain parts of Syria. Very, very tracking back into thousands of years. So there's a lot of different groups and a lot of different minorities. And he comes from a certain minority. And what happened was he brought in his whole family, basically, to the key points in government. If you wanted to talk about Syria from a demographic point of view, 75% of Syrian people are Muslim Sunnis. And then you have 1% to 2% of every other group. The Christians are about 10%. Most of them are Orthodox Christians in Syria. They've been there for a very long time. And the rest are very small groups. So he comes from one of those very, very small groups. And he brought his family into power. It wasn't too hard to see what direction he was taking. Maybe the year after he came to power, he made several trips to the Soviet Union, North Korea, Vietnam. So it was pretty clear which camp he was siding with, and we became, and this was not going to be clear the effect that this had until years to come. Syria being the last standing country for the Red Camp, basically in the region. In the Middle East, every other country sided with capitalism or with the West or with the newer order that came to the world, except Syria was stuck to the communism and the communism mentality. Due to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, he used that as means to put this country in the state of emergency in 1963. That state of emergency from 1963 went on until 2011. You're talking over 55 years of being to the point, and this is a true story, that when finally the state of emergency was taken down in 2011, and to me that was a big deal from a political point of view. People would come up and they would say, and they weren't happy with it. They were like, why is the state of emergency? Because they thought that this meant that they couldn't call the emergency anymore. This is how little they understood of it, because this is what life was. They grew up in this system and in this state, and their parents did too. They had no idea what the state of emergency even meant for a country. They're just like, so now we can't phone the emergency? Like, no, of course you know. What are you talking about? Of course you can phone the emergency. This is a state. Now the state of emergency being that, of course, you lose your civil rights the moment the intelligence has anything to say about it. And that is how the country was run. Just like the Kremlin ran the Soviet Union, the same thing happened in Syria. We had over 17 independent intelligence institutions in Syria. Over 17 independent, meaning that they had no interconnections. If you were taken by one, you could be taken by the other the second day. That's mostly how things happen. To the point where in Syria, if you were taken by an intelligence institution, not only were you, of course, no reason was needed. I mean, sometimes reasons were offered, but no reason was ever needed. No one was allowed to go and kind of inquire about your status. People just accepted that this person is gone. Literally, this person is gone. And he would probably never come back. Or if he would come back, you're talking 25, maybe 30 years. And these are stories that we used to live in Syria. And this brought forward a very, very closed-minded mentality towards politics. People did not speak of politics. Prior to 2011, and I remember this because I lived there for most of my life. Just before 2011, as a university student, very active, on both political, religious, social venues in Syria, that if you wanted to speak about politics, anyone in your age group, or even younger, would say, be quiet, the walls have ears. And that is the literal quote that every single Syrian has heard 1,000,000 times during his lifetime. You do not speak of politics. Why would you speak of politics? It's none of your business. This has nothing to do with you, because easily, this is going to end you up in an intelligent facility, and it's known that between Egypt and Syria, the worst intelligent facilities on earth exist. If you're in there, then the brutality that you see is something that is beyond. Just like basically the stories we got from Nazi Germany or from the Soviet Union. These are the type of stories that were there, and this is how the country was run. Since 1963, nothing has changed. Up to 2011, nothing changed. Not one thing. And the funny part is that if you go and you take a look, just open Wikipedia if you're interested. Just read, what is the political system of Syria. It has one party. It has one political party. That's it. There's only one. So either you're part of that political party, or you're not into politics. There's no other alternative. Like if you want to be on the other side, just to talk the opposite narrative, you just want to be the opposition. There is no opposition. Either you're part of this party, or you mind your own business from a political point of view. And so there's really no outlet for people to talk about these issues or to be involved in these issues in any way. Coming up to 2011, so this is basically the climate, the political climate of the country. This is how it's run, and this is how people, kind of go through their lives. People don't talk about politics. They're very uneducated, politically speaking, about their country. You can ask a Syrian about the politics of the United States. They know it down to the detail. Like people know Reagan and Nixon. These names are used as household names in Syria. But Syrian politics are never spoken of. The fact is that you just can't get into it. And it's run by a very small minority. They call it the country. Up to 2001, just before the Twin Towers came down, he died. Assad died. He died, and immediately his 36-year-old son was given power. He had sent him to Britain. He studied medicine. He was an ophthalmologist. He came back, and within a night, they changed the constitution, because the constitution dictates in Syria that if you're not 40 years old, you cannot be the president. He was only 36. So at night, at 12 o'clock at night, he said, no, it's all documented. None of this is hearsay. You can go look it up and read it if you like. They brought in all the legislators. They changed the constitution, and he was given the power, the next morning, and he's been president ever since. In 2010, when the so-called Arabic Spring began in places like Tunisia, places like Egypt, Yemen, all these different countries, and Libya, all these countries started to kind of rebel against their own governments that are very. There is no democracy in the Middle East at all. Like there is no country that I can tell you where if you go there that there's actually democracy where you can actually run for president at any point, actually think of it or talk about it or tell your kid one day you can be anything else, just don't be that, because it's impossible. There is no country that has that in Syria. The closest we have is Tunisia after the 2010 revolution that they had. Everything else, especially in the heart of the Middle East, you're talking Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, all the Gulf, and Egypt and Algeria, there are no democracies. It's all run through dictatorships. Certain people hold on to the government, and that's how it goes on. So when these things start to happen, the Syrian people got this wind of change, and they thought that the same thing could happen in Syria. But the problem in Syria is that the complexity of the Syrian problem is just too deep. We have too many minorities in the country. We're too close to the Israeli border. We're the last standing representative of the Red Camp from the East. So there's China, the Soviet Union, Iran, North Korea, all these powers from the East holding on to that. And then there's a religious issue that comes in, the Shiites taking on like a certain number of countries, and they hold on to the governments there. So maybe it was simpler in Tunisia. It was clearly political, and it was internally political. For Syria, it wasn't. It was an external issue. Everyone had some thing to say about the Syrian conflict. Everyone had an opinion and a preference for who was going to come into power if Syria was to become unstable or change was going to be presented into the picture. On March 15th, 2011, the first rally happened in a place called Daraa, just southern of where I used to live. And from the first day, I remember because I was resident at a university hospital. I just finished medical school and I was going back and forth as an internal medicine resident. And from the first day, people started asking for something and they started shooting at me. So basically the regime, because this is how the mentality of the regime or these governments is that you have no right to have anything to say. You should be very thankful that the government is providing for you. This is how they kind of explain things. So when people have something to say about it, they're treated maybe even worse than animals would be treated. So they started shooting at them, and they killed a lot of people. And that just made things worse because people got even more angry because we were comparing ourselves, unfortunately, a very uneducated population of people, politically speaking, comparing ourselves to Egypt that had political freedom for at least 20 years. Yes, there's a dictator, but they have political freedom. You can have more than one party. We had one party, that's it. It's one party. We've never actually talked about politics actively or openly. This wouldn't happen in Syria. So someone standing in, no, I would need to be cleared by at least 3 different intelligent institutions just to stand up and give, even if it was teaching culinary, actually talking about cooking, I would still need that. This is how the country was run. And just one thing led to another, more uprising, more people started talking, more people were killed, and then interference. And then everyone started to interfere. The political party, Hezbollah from Lebanon, entered and sided with the regime and started helping with putting up roadblocks. Basically, how they run the country today is through roadblocks. From my house in the village, I live in probably the most beautiful place in the world. The prettiest place on earth. That's where I live in a very small village of 2,800 people. Basically, the people who carry my last name are 1,400 of them. So who carry my last name? It's just part of my family. I don't even know that I'm related to. But a very, very small village on the footsteps of Mount Hermon. If you go to the top of the mountain, it's the highest mountain in the region. You get to see 3 or 4 different countries. You get to see Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, and Syria. Just from the top, just a beautiful, beautiful place. I would walk out of my house and just go around because all my uncles live just a couple steps away, and it's just a lot of fruits and trees. So I can count like 10 different types of fruit. I would just be walking around and coming back and have a stomachache and be it's just a very, very beautiful. So I never actually decided to live in Damascus. I worked there, but I loved staying there. It was 45 minutes from my house to the hospital. They ran the country through roadblocks. So every 2-3 kilometers, they put a roadblock up, a military roadblock. And because there's 17 different intelligence institutions, each and every one of them put their own roadblocks. It took me 3 hours to get to a place that previously 45 minutes would be more than enough to get there. And every time you have to take out your identification card, and you never knew which roadblock was going to tell you just to come out of the public transportation, and then you would end up wherever you would end up. And that's basically how they kind of ran the country at that time. More interference happened from the west, and then from the east, and then from other governments, and then it just got out of hand. And no longer was it people asking for political freedom. It was just different sides that had long-lasting animosities and scores to take care of with each other. They were all fighting within the country, and it just went out of hand. And the number of people that have been killed in Syria, and the number of people who have disappeared, like within the intelligence institutions, is maybe it's not clear now, but when this is over and you go and the history comes out, then the numbers will be staggering. And whatever happened in World War II will become, this will side up very, 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 very closely, very equally to what happened there. The number of people who died. I can count at least 15 personal friends and family members who either died, killed, or been taken into custody, or anything. When I say into custody, I mean they're as good as dead.